So now that the dust has settled, was the Part 7 anime actually any good? Well, I think it's obvious from the opening of the first episode, as well as the amount of great shots that were adapted, to even the memes that were snuck in there. And while I'll be showing the great animators that helped out on this first episode later in the video, the question I've got to ask is, why does Steel Ball Run look this good? And more importantly, how did they even manage to animate it in the first place? Well, from the first time we saw director Yasuhiro Kimura on that horse, we knew that the anime was going to be different. This was the first time David Production had actually done anything like this before, showcasing the team that actually works on the anime, as he was also the animation director for a lot of the Part 5 anime, storyboarding the early episodes, injecting the manga panel references into the openings, and even being the director that was responsible for the torture dance scene. Joining him was co-director Hideya Takahashi, and looking at his credits, he was sort of the other half of why the Golden Wind anime turned out so great, picking up the second ending as well as the other early episodes. And so we're getting that same duo on for Part 7. And while they're probably hard at work on the storyboards for the next batch of episodes, if you check the credits of that first episode, it ended up having over 200 animators on board, just for that 47-minute episode. That not even including an opening or ending. And because of this, I thought it was kind of a warning sign before it came out. But rather than the episode being better or worse than previous parts, it ended up being more of a different tone. A tone that was prioritizing a more cinematic ride-along vibe to it, like you're joining them for one long journey that isn't centered around any commercial breaks, set release dates, or runtime. With that said, the actual release schedule is a little bit funky, which we'll get into later, but the overall quality has been surprisingly great, as the previous parts, as well as what little was shown, had fans kind of worried, as the general consensus around the Part 7 anime would be how hard it is to animate the whole. But from what we've seen from the anime, they weren't solely done in just 3D, and the 3D that was 3D didn't really even look like 3D at times. For comparison, here's how the 3D riders and horses looked from Part 2. And you can really start to see how far the anime has come. As in motion, the 2D backgrounds and the 3D just blend in seamlessly. And this was due in part to series director Toshiyuki Kato, as he states that back in the days of the Phantom Blood Battle Tendency and Stardust Crusaders anime, he didn't think it would even be possible. But only in the last 3 or 4 years did the team finally see a direction that they might actually be able to pull off. In fact, before David Production actually finalized the current animation approach, they made an in-house prototype of just under 20 cuts. As to explain, a cut is the same concept as a shot in filmmaking. So Johnny riding here would be a cut, switching to this shot would be another cut, and then this establishing shot would be another one. But these were only internal tests, and were made right after the Part 6 anime wrapped up. And when those tests were finished, Kato-san stated that this is bad. I would love to get my hands on the footage or storyboards of this, but seemingly from this, the team actually learned a lot of what not to do, and ended up serving as a sort of a guidepost in terms of building up the sense of directions for how to use this CGI, as a big part of this was the timing and direction. Quick shots of 3D then cut together with 2D shots in sort of a sandwich of animations, creating this seamless watching experience. Now, you might be thinking, so what? Anime do this every week all the time. The main problem here is the anatomy of a horse. Essentially, their joints don't act how they look, their front and back legs moving independently. And if you animate that even slightly wrong, it just looks completely off. So it would take a massive amount of time to get that motion of a horse correct. Plus, a huge chunk of the manga is not only people on horseback, but also talking on horseback, meaning the animation needs to loop or stretch out for the dialogue to finish, while also maintaining that movement. And to make that loop in 2D, you have to do that every time you do it from a new angle. So to do it in-house at David Production, let alone giving it to a freelancer, can cause some major issues in the pipeline. And that's kind of why you're seeing so many 3D horses used. I mean, you can tell when I pause it like this, they still don't look great, but here's Kimura's second technique. As you notice, the horses are stylized in a way that makes them seem way faster than they would look in real life. As from interviews, he said, "So we drew the horses as if they were actually going 300 kilometers per hour. I watched the film Gran Turismo before making the episode and watched a bunch of F1. So when the horses run, they go boom, just like the cars do." So gathering from that, this fast pace of the anime not only moves the plot forward, but hides the blemishes created by the complexity the 3D is called for. And while we don't get to see clear close-ups of any of these 3D models yet, we do know that the animators have these models as well as the character design sheets to go off this season, as it seems that these main characters all get these 3D models as well as their horses. So they're definitely going to look way more consistent than previous parts. And taking a look at the sheets that we do have, courtesy of the latest issue of the JoJo magazine, we can see a lot of these character designs up close. And what I noticed is just how expressive these characters are. We get to see Johnny's different outfits, close-ups of the races we didn't get the best look at, as well as the horses and camel of each of the races, which the anime took the time to make them feel like characters in of themselves. And to compare them to the previous part's characters, they look most closely to part 3 and 5, as while the shorter height and thinner limbs pull it to the Golden Wind anime, elements like the vacuum stomachs of the part 3 designs stylize it sort of into its own thing. The small faces next to the big character sheets are actually references to the manga panels, and this is where we get to see just how expressive these characters can be. And for some, we get to see a completely different side of them that I thought they might not be able to pull off by their initial design. And going off these base designs, you can kind of see how they change depending on who's animating it, as JoJo is getting more and more animators from overseas now, and we get to see this on full display from the credits of the episode. Again, over roughly 200 animators worked on this episode, as this isn't just one studio from part 1 anymore, it's a global pipeline now. But the thing is, because it's the first episode, not all the information's out yet, so going off what some of the animators have posted already, as well as cross-referencing shots from previous parts and fan animations, I can first showcase this awesome shot by Liam Chang, as this guy has such a sense of motion in his line work and is a perfect match for the spin of the steel balls. But we also get a different take on the ball in this episode too, with Alex Torres's version using these amazing smear lines, as well as the motion of the hair looking amazing. But in the second part of this sequence, it's by another amazing upcoming animator, their handle being Gobble, and they did this really nice cut of Poco Loco sliding down on the cow. And I mentioned this earlier, but this is actually a really great time to talk about how they integrated this 3D so seamlessly, as Steel Ball Run might have the best example of this actually working, as it leads off from this 2D shot of Sandman and cuts to a 3D gyro and Sandman, but the Poco Loco here is in 2D, and if you notice, the 2D is kept in full view, while the 3D is constantly being obscured by the cape, which is super slick of David Production, because as you begin to notice there's 3D on screen, there's then another cut to them sliding, then less than a second later, another cut which the view focusing on Poco Loco screaming in the previous shot makes the viewer snap to them, and then again right before the viewer notices the 3D gyro in the background, the cow that Poco Loco was riding flies in front of him, and it's techniques like that on how they're bringing these highly detailed characters to life. Oh, and since we know Grand Gorilla also worked on this episode, I cross-referenced some of the shots from the episodes of the Part 6 anime he worked on, as well as some of his old art, and it seems like he did a lot of the Poco Loco close-up scenes, and was perhaps the one doing the ISHOWSPEED meme. And on that note, I don't know how these keep getting passed in general. Like, is it the overseas animators having fun, or is it the Japanese learning new memes? But it wasn't just the main characters that got this treatment, as it's actually the civilians and background characters that bring so much life to the world of Steel Ball Run. And being a sub-character designer, a couple of the crowd and maybe the racers were designed by Grand as well, as if you've noticed, they're not using the silhouettes like seen in Part 6, and are really putting a lot of effort into these background character designs, as even these have 3D models. For example, in this wide shot, try and count the number of purple dressed ladies in this crowd. So a lot of work is being put in this part. Even the little guys which show up around the part and seem to sort of multiply were even adapted into the anime. But what did get cut kind of sucked. No giant ice, no mini horse race. Now I get why they did it, as they're trying to keep this new pacing that they're trying to go for. But a lot of the start, especially the stuff around Sandman, which I did animate a bit already, as well as this animation I found over on Bilibili, were all seemingly cut, but this can be viewed as just another technique of why it felt so well animated. Rather than including stuff like the Sandman running explanation or Poco Loco slowing down to talk to this mysterious figure, it kept the pace, and because of that, there was no downtime once the race started. This might not be the best method of pacing it for the rest of the show, but for the start, it's made a massive impact. So I really hope Netflix has noticed. As yes, don't worry, they are working on more, but when is kind of hard to say. The trailer they just released for the second stage shows a lot of cool stuff, but this first episode may just be a test from the heads of Netflix, so let's just hope they get the message. Whereas on the David Production side, well, they're just cracking on and animating it relative to like a TV schedule, but because they have a little bit more time, maybe they can catch some of the errors that have occurred, such as Avdol magically gaining an undershirt in the middle of the race based on his character sheet, in which they'll probably probably fix in the Blu-rays, as Part 6 was kind of notorious for how much they didn't fix. But you can check out how they fixed the previous parts on the left. Or if you want to know more of how Netflix will release the rest of Steel Ball Run, click the video on the right.